I heard the laughter before I even turned the knob. It was not the warm kind you get when your wife has friends over and everyone is having a good time. It was sharp and mean, like somebody had slipped a tack under a chair and was waiting for the yelp. My stomach tightened. I did not know the joke yet, but I knew I was the punchline. I walked in and saw my living room turned into a little clubhouse. 5 women sat in a circle like a book club gone off the rails. Notebooks and pens were scattered all over the coffee table. Their faces were red from laughing. Emily stood in the center like the master of ceremonies, waving a handwritten list as if it were a prize. She lifted her voice and said, "And number 12, and then she started laughing again. He has to ask for permission before buying anything over $20. They howled. One of them actually slapped her knee, as if it were the funniest thing she had heard all year. I stood in the doorway with my keys still in my hand and watched my wife perform. This was not the Emily I married. The woman I married had her own opinions. She did not need a committee to tell her what to think. Now she was playing ringleader, soaking up their approval like it was oxygen. "Oh, look. Speak of the devil," Jessica chirped when she saw me. Heads turned. Suddenly, I was the main attraction, but not in any good way. I felt like a bug under glass. "Perfect timing," Emily said, her eyes bright. "Come here, honey. The girls and I have been working on something really fun." She waved the list like a trophy. "We are making a list of rules that will make marriages so much better. You know, guidelines for husbands to follow." The word guidelines landed like a slap. These were not suggestions. These were not equals working things out. These were orders wrapped in pretty paper and tied with a bow labeled friendship and empowerment. I stepped closer. I could feel them watching me the way a cat watches a bird feeder. They wanted me to explode and prove their point about men being unreasonable, or they wanted me to roll over and give them the win. Either way, they were ready to clap. "Rules," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What kind of rules?" Amanda, who I had met maybe 3 times, leaned in as if she had been waiting for her cue. "We have some really good ones," she said. "Mandatory date nights that he plans and pays for. No sports on television when we want to watch something else." She paused and smiled. "And a weekly performance review where we grade how well he is doing as a husband." The circle broke into another round of laughter, like they had just discovered a new invention. Emily nodded hard and jumped in. "And if he fails the review, no privileges for a week." She even made air quotes around the word privileges, then winked at her friends. Something cold moved into my chest. It was not anger. It was a hard kind of clarity. I could see exactly what this was. They were not joking. They believed they had the right to design a system to control their husbands, and they were using each other to make it feel normal. "That is creative," I said, and I pulled out a chair to join their circle. "Mind if I hear the whole list? I am curious about the thinking behind it." Emily smiled like I had just agreed to sign a contract. She took my calm as a yes. "Of course," she said. "We have been working on it for hours. We are up to number 18 so far." She cleared her throat and started from the beginning. I looked around the circle while she read. These were not strangers. I had welcomed these women into my home. I had cooked for them. I had made small talk at birthdays and game nights. Now they were sitting in my living room writing a manual on how to housebreak me. There was one thing they did not understand about me. Maybe Emily had forgotten it in all the excitement of showing off to her friends. I do not break when someone pushes. I do not give in to demands that do not make sense. And I do not let people humiliate me in my own house. If they wanted a lesson in consequences, I was ready to teach one they would remember. Emily lifted her chin and read with the bright energy of a lottery announcer. Each item was more insulting than the one before it. "Rule 1, she said. "All major decisions require wife approval. That includes career changes, large purchases, and social commitments." She raised her eyebrows at me to see if I was taking notes. Nicole leaned toward her from the left and jumped in. "Rule 7 is my favorite," she said. "He has to give a daily gratitude speech about what his wife does for him. It has to be at least 2 minutes long." The group burst into giggles again. I sat there, calm and steady, and listened to every word. They all nodded like they were hearing deep wisdom, when it was really just a public shaming plan put together by people with too much time and not enough self-awareness. Nicole lifted her chin and said, "Rule number 11. Another friend jumped in to read it out loud. "No spending time with single friends. They are a bad influence and might give him ideas about freedom." She stretched out the word freedom like it was something dangerous you had to keep locked up. I sat back and watched the psychology show itself. These women had convinced themselves they were relationship professionals. In truth, they were just nervous controllers looking for applause from other nervous controllers. What about rule number 15? Emily asked the group. The one about his appearance. The woman with the notebook perked up and answered fast. He must dress according to her preferences at every social event. No more embarrassing her with his clothing choices. The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. Half of them showed up to neighborhood cookouts dressed like they had raided a teenager's closet, but apparently I needed supervision to pick a shirt. And rule number 16, Emily added with extra delight, is about his hobbies. He can only have activities that include her or that somehow benefit the household. No more selfish interests. The group hummed their agreement like a bunch of yes men nodding for a boss. I watched Emily soak it in. The independent woman I married had faded, replaced by someone who needed a crowd to clap before she felt sure of herself. What is rule number 18? I asked, honestly curious how deep this tunnel went. The note-taker checked her page. A weekly allowance system. He gets spending money based on how well he followed the other rules that week. Good behavior earns rewards. Bad behavior gets punished. They were talking about me like I was a child in my own house, and I was sitting 3 feet away. The disrespect was casual. It was so normal inside their echo chamber, they could not even hear it. And we are not done, Emily said proudly. We are thinking about adding rules for his family interactions, his work schedule, maybe even his diet. Oh yes, another friend chimed in. Men have no self-control with food. They need structure. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. This is really thorough, I said. You have clearly put a lot of thought into it. My tone was easy, even a little appreciative. Can I ask something? Of course, Emily said, glowing like she had just won an award. How would you enforce these rules? I mean, what happens when someone does not go along with them? That question lit them up. They started talking over one another. Withholding privileges, one said. Public embarrassment, another said. Financial consequences, a third added. Emily nodded hard. Exactly. And if he is really stubborn, we can use social pressure. Get his friends' wives involved. Make it a community effort. There it was. The big weapon. Turn the whole social circle into hall monitors. Build a neighborhood enforcement squad to keep husbands in line. A suburban surveillance state with clipboards and scorecards. That is brilliant, I said, and I meant it in a different way. Not because the plan was good, but because they had just shown me how far they were willing to go and how little respect they had for any man in their world. The friend with the notebook looked up. We should make copies for everyone and start using these in our own marriages. See what happens. Like a test group, Emily agreed. We could meet every week to compare notes, see which rules work best, and add new ones based on our experiences. I sat there and listened to them plan the careful dismantling of their marriages while praising their own genius. They had no idea what they were about to set in motion. They did not see how their experiment would come back around. But I did. While they drafted a rule book for micromanagement, I had been building something much simpler. Just one rule. That was all I needed. One rule that would show the flaw in their whole philosophy. One rule that would end their little power game for good. They kept talking, passing the list around, trading ideas, patting each other on the back. The room settled into a steady rhythm of mutual praise, and I sat there, calm and quiet, ready for the moment to speak. They took turns praising each other, acting like they were writing some brave new constitution for married life. Emily was glowing, soaking up the attention like she was the head of a movement. So, said the one with the notebook, Brittany, clicking her pen like a judge calling court to order. I think we should present the full list to him right now and get his official response. She gave me the kind of smile you give a kid before you hand him a chore chart. Emily clapped her hands. Perfect timing. Honey, we would like to go through the entire list with you. Think of it as an orientation for your new and improved marriage. The others giggled at that line, proud of the wording. They shifted into position like a tribunal. Notebooks ready. Pens up. Eyes on me. They expected me to nod, argue a little, then give in and accept their authority. I appreciate the effort you have all put into this, I said, leaning back like I was settling in for a slideshow. Before we walk through every item, I want to make sure I have the framework right. That seemed to please them. Emily gave me an encouraging nod, like I was finally getting with the program. These rules are for husbands specifically, correct? I asked. That is right, Brittany said without missing a beat. Men need more structure in relationships. That is just how they are wired. And the enforcement you mentioned, I said, that would be carried out by the wives. Exactly, Emily said, proud as could be. We are taking charge of creating healthier dynamics. I nodded like I was learning great truth. What about accountability on the other side? Are there any rules or standards for the wives? That caught them flat-footed. A few glances went around the circle. Well, Jessica said slowly, wives regulate themselves naturally. We do not need external rules because we are already focused on the relationship. The arrogance took my breath for a second. They had convinced themselves they were born better at love, and the men were defective units needing management and reminders. That makes sense, I said mildly. So this is a one-way system. Wives create the rules. Husbands follow them. No reciprocal structure. That is right, Emily said, though I could see a flicker of doubt about where I was headed. I leaned forward a little. How did you come up with these specific rules? Did you ask your husbands what they thought would actually improve your marriages? Silence. It hung in the air like a heavy coat. We based them on our experiences, Amanda said at last. We know what works. And your husband's experiences, did those factor into the decisions? I asked. Emily shifted in her seat. This is not really about what they want. It is about creating structure. Structure, I repeated, tasting the word. So you believe your collective wisdom is enough to decide what is best for every marriage in this room? They nodded, but the energy had gone soft. My questions were poking holes in the raft. That is a big responsibility, I said. Making unilateral rules that affect other people's relationships. I am impressed by the confidence. Brittany squirmed a little. We are not making decisions for other people. We are offering suggestions. I glanced at the list with its penalties and consequences and shook my head lightly. Those look less like suggestions and more like legislation. Emily felt the shift. Why are you being so analytical? This is meant to be helpful. I want to understand what I would be signing up for, I said calmly. Once we put a system like this in place, it changes the nature of the relationship. We should be sure we understand the trade-offs. They were getting restless. This was not the script they had planned. They had pictured quick surrender or a few easy objections, not a slow, steady cross-examination of the whole idea. Look, Emily said, trying for patience. We have put a lot of work into this. The least you can do is listen with an open mind. Absolutely, I said. But if I am going to be subject to 18 rules that I did not help write, it seems fair that I get to add one rule of my own to the system. The room went still. They had not planned for that. In their setup, I was supposed to receive their wisdom, not help make the rules. They went around the circle taking turns praising each other's contributions to what they clearly saw as a grand plan for controlling marriage. Emily was almost glowing, like a captain standing on the deck of a brand new ship. So, Brittany said, clicking her pen with authority, I think we should present the complete list to him now. We want his official response. She looked straight at me with a little condescending smile, the same one you give a child right before you hand him instructions. Emily clapped once. Perfect timing. Honey, we would like to go through the entire list with you. Think of it as an orientation for your new and improved marriage. The others giggled at that line, very pleased with themselves. They sat up like a tribunal, notebooks open, pens ready to record my reactions. They expected compliance, maybe a few soft objections, then a slow nod and acceptance of their authority. I appreciate the work you all put into this, I said, settling back like I had time for a long presentation. Before we go through the list, I want to make sure I understand the overall framework. That seemed to please them. Emily nodded, thinking I was finally taking their project seriously. These rules apply to husbands specifically, correct? I asked. That is right, Brittany said. Men need more structure in relationships. That is how they are wired. And those enforcement mechanisms you mentioned, I asked, those would be implemented by the wives. Exactly, Emily said proudly. We are taking charge of creating healthier dynamics. I nodded as if I were absorbing wisdom. What about accountability on the other side? Are there any rules or standards that the wives must follow? That question threw them off. They glanced at each other. Well, Jessica said slowly, wives regulate themselves naturally. We do not need external rules because we are already focused on the relationship. The arrogance was something to behold. They had decided they were the superior partners, and the husbands were defective units in need of constant management. That makes sense, I said evenly. So this is a one-way system. Wives create rules. Husbands follow them. There is no reciprocal structure. That is right, Emily said, though she looked a little unsure now. I leaned forward. How did you come up with these specific rules? Did you survey your husbands about what would actually improve your marriages? The silence had weight. Of course they had not asked. We based them on our experiences, Amanda said at last. We know what works. And your husband's experiences? I asked. Did those factor into the decision-making? Emily shifted in her chair. This is not really about their experiences. It is about creating structure. Structure, I repeated. So you believe your collective wisdom is enough to decide what is best for all the marriages represented here? They nodded, but the enthusiasm was gone. My questions were poking holes. That is a significant responsibility, I said. Making unilateral decisions that affect other people's relationships. I admire your confidence. Brittany shifted in her seat. We are not making decisions for other people. We are offering suggestions. I looked down at the pages with listed penalties and consequences for noncompliance. Those read less like suggestions and more like legislation. Emily's tone tightened. Why are you being so analytical? This is supposed to be helpful. I want to understand exactly what you are proposing, I said. If we implement a system like this, it changes the nature of the relationship. We should think through the implications. They were getting restless. This was not the simple yes they had expected. Look, Emily said, trying to sound patient. We put a lot of work into this. The least you can do is listen with an open mind. Absolutely, I said. But if I am going to be subject to 18 rules I did not help create, it is only fair that I contribute one rule of my own to the system. The room went quiet. In their plan, I was supposed to receive orders, not help write them. What kind of rule? Emily asked cautiously. I smiled, the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. Just one simple rule that would make the whole system balanced and fair. If we are going to restructure marriage dynamics, it ought to be collaborative. They could not refuse without admitting the thing was one-sided. But agreeing to hear me meant opening a door they did not see coming. Emily looked to her friends for support. Curiosity mixed with concern on every face. Fine, she said at last. One rule. Then we go through our list. Perfect, I said. I stood up slowly. I let the air in the room get tight. They watched me with a mix of interest and unease. They felt the ground tilt, but did not know why. First, I said, pacing a little, I want to say I am impressed by your dedication to improving marriages. 18 rules is thorough. Very thorough. It shows serious thought. Emily preened a bit at the praise, but her friends looked skeptical. My calm was not landing like a win anymore. My rule is much simpler, I said, stopping and facing them. Just one sentence. Easy to remember. Easy to apply. Brittany lifted her pen, ready to write. Go ahead, she said, covering her impatience poorly. I clasped my hands behind my back, like someone about to make an announcement. Any woman who participates in creating rules to control her husband is, by that act, declaring herself available for the same treatment from other men. Silence. Clean and hard. You could have heard a pin hit the hardwood. The smiles drained away while the implications sank in. What does that mean exactly? Emily asked. Her voice had lost its previous confidence. It means, I said, steady and conversational, that when you establish the principle that a spouse can unilaterally create binding rules for the other, you open the door to reciprocal treatment. If it is acceptable for you to make rules for me, then it is acceptable for me to make rules for you. Brittany shook her head. That is not the same thing. Is it not? I asked. You spent the last hour claiming husbands need structure and oversight, that we cannot be trusted to make good decisions without guidance. I am applying that same logic to wives who believe they can redesign other people's marriages without consultation. Emily's face tightened. This was just a fun exercise. We were not serious. I picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was careful. The rules were detailed. There were enforcement strategies and even timelines. This looks serious to me. Multiple pages of regulations, punishment systems, and plans for community enforcement. That is not a party game. The friend who had pitched the weekly performance reviews started backing away from her own idea. We were just brainstorming. It was not meant to be taken literally. Interesting, I said, placing the notebook back on the table. Because when you explained withholding privileges and using social pressure to ensure compliance, it sounded very literal. I walked back to my chair, but did not sit. I leaned on it casually, like we were talking about the weather. Here is what I find fascinating. You were excited about creating rules for husbands. You were energized by that control. But the moment I suggest the same approach might apply to you, now it is unreasonable. The room felt smaller. The confidence was gone. Hands fidgeted. Eyes dropped. So, let me clarify my rule, I said, standing straight. Any woman who believes she has the right to create behavioral guidelines for her husband has, by that belief, consented to having behavioral guidelines created for her. Equal treatment. Fair is fair. Emily found her voice softer than before. You cannot be serious. Why not? I asked. You were serious. You had 18 rules ready to roll, with penalties for noncompliance. You planned to share the system with other wives and build a network to enforce it. That sure sounds serious. The friend who had been loudest about the punishment stared down at her hands and said nothing. It is different when it is the other way around, Emily said. How so? I asked. Please explain the difference. Because from where I stand, it looks like you are excited about rules and control when you are the ones holding the power, and it suddenly becomes unfair the moment the same power might be used on you. No one answered. They could not explain why their authority was valid and mine was not, without admitting that this whole thing was about dominance, not improvement. I let the silence sit. Then I laid out the last step of my plan. Since we are all very committed to fairness and structure, I said, I think your husbands should review this rulemaking project. They should know their wives have been meeting to design systems for controlling them. Do you not think they deserve that level of transparency? The panic hit the room like a cold wind. A minute ago, they were bold, eager to manage their husbands. Now they looked frightened at the idea of their husbands knowing what they had cooked up. You would not, Emily whispered. I smiled the kind of smile that says the decision has already been made. Watch me. I took out my phone as calmly as if I were ordering a pizza. The reaction was instant. All 5 women stared at the phone like it was a live wire. Wait, 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 Brittany blurted, her voice jumping a note. You do not need to involve anyone else. Why not? I asked, scrolling my contacts. You just talked about community enforcement, getting other wives involved to make sure the rules stick. I am simply expanding the community to include the husbands. Emily lunged forward, as if she might grab the phone. Please do not do this. It will ruin everything. Ruin what exactly? I asked, holding the phone out of reach. I thought this was about improving marriages. Should that not be something husbands would want to hear about? Jessica, the one who loved the idea of daily gratitude speeches, was breathing fast. My husband will be furious if he hears about this. Furious? I raised an eyebrow. That is a strong reaction to hearing that his wife wants to improve the marriage. Unless he would not see this as improvement at all. I found the first name I wanted. Dave. He and I worked together sometimes on neighborhood projects. Good man. I doubted he knew his wife spent her evenings drafting behavior plans. Let us start with Dave, I said, showing the screen to Jessica. He seems like a person who would appreciate transparency in a marriage. No, she almost shouted. He will think I am crazy. Why would he think that? I asked, sounding as polite as I could. These are helpful suggestions for a better partnership, correct? Amanda, who had been very excited about financial control earlier, edged toward the door. I should probably go. This is not really my business. Oh, but it is your business, I said, turning to her. You pitched rule number 14 about the allowance system. Your husband should know you believe he needs financial supervision. She froze halfway to the hallway, stuck between the urge to run and the fear that any sudden move might make me press the call button. Emily was in full panic now. Look, we can forget the whole thing. Just put the phone away and we will pretend this never happened. Pretend what never happened? I asked. The part where you and your friends spend hours building a system to control and humiliate your husbands? Or the part where you plan to implement it without their knowledge or consent? Brittany tried a softer angle. We were just venting. You know how women sit together and complain about their husbands. It is normal. Is it normal to map out enforcement strategies? I asked, picking up their notebook again. Because this looks less like venting and more like a business plan for domestic control. I read from the pages. Weekly performance reviews with grading. Privilege removal for noncompliance. social pressure campaigns involving other couples. I looked up. This is not venting. This is systematic planning. Nicole, the one who pushed the clothing rules, twisted her fingers together. Please. My husband is already suspicious about my girls' nights. If he finds out we were talking about controlling him, he will never let me come to another one. Let you? I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Sounds like he already understands the idea of boundaries. I held my phone up again, my thumb over Dave's contact. You know what? I think I will call him first. I want his thoughts on rule number 13 about mandatory household chores. Stop, Jessica shouted. I will do anything. Please do not call him. The desperation in her voice told me I had landed exactly where I wanted. These women who had been so eager to boss their husbands around were coming apart at the seams the second the idea of consequences showed up. Anything? I asked. That is a big promise. What exactly are you offering? Jessica looked to her friends for backup, but everyone was too busy trying to save her own situation to help. I will throw away the notebook, she said. We will never talk about this again. That is a start, I said, but it does not touch the real problem. You all decided you had the right to redesign your marriages without talking to your partners. That is not a notebook problem. That is a respect problem. Emily was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I am sorry, she said. I got carried away. The girls were so excited, and I wanted to fit in. There it was, the engine under the whole mess. She had been willing to embarrass me and take a sledgehammer to our marriage just to look good in front of a group that would probably talk about her the minute she left. Fit in, I repeated. You were willing to grind down your husband's dignity so you could fit in with people who convinced you that controlling your spouse is normal. Brittany, the note-taker, edged toward the door again. Maybe we should all go home and forget this ever happened. Oh no, I said, steady and firm. We are not done. Every one of you helped build this machine. You are going to understand exactly why it was wrong and what the fallout could have been. I looked at the 5 of them, former self-appointed judges, now looking like guilty conspirators who had just seen the blue lights in the rearview mirror. Here is what happens next, I said, with the same authority they had been itching to use on their husbands. You are going to sit down, and you are going to listen while I explain how this gets resolved. No one moved for the exit. They knew the door was closed. They also knew the cards were in my hand now. The power swap was complete, and they were about to learn what it felt like to sit on the receiving end of somebody else's rules. They sat, stiff and small, like defendants waiting for sentencing. Half an hour ago, they were judge, jury, and executioner. Now they could not even meet my eyes. I set my phone face down on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The threat was still present, but I wanted their full attention for what was coming. Let me tell you something about respect, I said, standing in front of their circle. Respect cannot be forced by rule. You cannot write a law that makes someone respect you. Respect is earned by what you do and lost by the choices you make. Emily dabbed at her face with a tissue and kept her head down. The others were quiet, finally recognizing they had crossed a line that does not uncross itself. Today, you made choices, I said. You chose to spend your time figuring out ways to shrink your husbands. You chose your egos over your marriages. You chose to treat partners as projects to be managed instead of equals to be respected. Amanda, the loudest supporter of the weekly allowance idea, spoke in a small voice. We did not mean it like that. Yes, you did, I said without blinking. You meant it exactly like that. You enjoyed the idea of that level of control. You laughed about it. You drafted enforcement steps. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was harmless. I lifted the notebook and held it up. This is not a doodle. This is hours of planning. Strategies for manipulation. Steps for control. You did not trip and fall into this. You picked this path, and you were proud of it until consequences showed up. Nicole, the one who wanted clothing rules, was crying quietly. Her husband works 2 jobs to keep their house going. The thought of slapping him with performance grades and compliance punishments was hitting her like a brick. Here is what happens now, I said, tearing the first page free. This ends today, not just the notebook. The mindset that wrote it. I tore another page. Paper drifted down like white leaves. You are going to go home and remember why you married your husbands. Not some polished version you think you can produce with enough rules. The actual men. The ones you chose. Another page ripped. Another piece fell to the floor. Emily watched me reduce their manifesto to scraps, and for the first time all evening, I saw something like relief in her eyes. And if any of you ever again think it is acceptable to sit around and design control systems for your spouse, I said, you are going to remember this moment. You are going to remember exactly how it felt when someone else held that kind of power over you. I tore out the last pages and let them drift to the floor. That phone call I threatened, that was nothing compared to what would have happened if they had actually tried to run this thing in real life. Brittany finally looked up at me. What do you mean? I mean your husbands are not fools, I said. They would have figured it out. And then you would have seen what it looks like when a man is done with disrespect and manipulation. I sat down and met each pair of eyes. You want to know the difference I see in how we handle this stuff? When some women get upset, they form committees, make plans, and gather support to validate the feeling. When men get upset, they leave. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you the point landed. They had been playing with fire and thought they were safe because the circle approved. They had not thought about what happens when the person you are targeting decides he is finished. I turned to Emily. My wife is going to make a choice right now. She can keep believing she knows better than me about how our marriage should work. Or she can remember that marriage is a partnership between equals. Emily looked up at me with red, tired eyes. I choose partnership, she whispered. Good, I said, because the other option was me choosing to find a partner who actually respects me. I stood and opened the front door. Ladies, this has been educational. Now it is time to head home and think about what you learned. They filed out one by one, quiet, most of them unable to meet my eye. Brittany paused on the threshold. Are you going to tell our husbands? That depends, I said. Are you going to give me a reason to? She shook her head fast and hurried to her car. Emily was the last one in the room, looking small and ashamed. We stood there for a moment while the weight of the evening settled. I am sorry, she said finally. I do not know what I was thinking. You were thinking you could get away with disrespect because you had backup, I said, calm and clear. You were thinking that if other people validated your behavior, then it must be acceptable. She nodded, tears starting again. How do we fix this? We fix it by remembering why this marriage works, I said. It works because we respect each other. The moment you decided I needed to be managed and controlled, you stopped being my partner and became my adversary. I looked down at the torn pages spread across the floor. Help me clean this up. While we do, you can tell me how you are going to make sure nothing like this happens again. We knelt and gathered the scraps of their rule book. As I picked up the pieces, it hit me that this was about more than shutting down a power grab. It was a reminder of who I am and what I will accept in my life. Some people think being a good husband means being so accommodating that you erase yourself. That is not strength. Real strength is not about dodging conflict. It is about standing up for yourself when the people who should respect you most try to grind you down. Emily learned that today, and so did I.